Hey guys, it's Lohpally here with another video, and today we're going to be going over our 8.7 tier list. Now before we do that and we jump into anything, I want to introduce the most important things that have happened in this patch so that you can better understand my thought process behind picking each of these champions. So for starters, we look at is Iron Locket Solari, which is usually our rush item on most support items that are tanks. Pretty much all the numbers are just being completely nerfed. The base shield is going down, the level power is going down, the bonus health ratio is getting nerfed significantly, cooldowns increased, and you get a lot more diminishing returns for stacking it. So that makes tank supports significantly weaker since this is your primary first item that you build every time. Next to note, Ninja Tabby is no longer going to be as strong too, since its armor is going down from 30 to 20, and it's getting a bump in attack damage reduction, but overall its efficiency is going from about 105% to 85%. Next thing to note too is the Relic Shield line is going to be reduced heavily also. The Gold Pretend build into it is going down from 2 to 1 and 4 from 4 to 1. Which means that you do not get any basically ambient gold from Relic Shield line anymore. This significantly hurts the resolve tree also because of the fact that you will have less starting health in the early stages too. So as you can see kind of from the first point of view, kind of explaining to you guys the resolve tree, all these tank nerfs, the champions that use this, such as Braum and Tahm Kench most often, are significantly weaker. In pretty much every respect in gold generation, their item selection, and even their tree in the early stages, since you don't get access to a lot of this extra HP since you're usually under leveled as a support. And then one thing tying it all together, that's the most pretty much important part of this, is this new mini game that's being introduced. For those who don't remember, Manaflow Band used to give you every 75 seconds a free spell. And then I think it's 8% of your missing mana back also. So this talent was a very good one to have pretty much on any champion that spend mana. And now it's being changed. It's being changed into a mini game where hitting enemies with spell gives you 25 max mana, up to 250 mana, 15-second cooldown. And then upon 250 mana, which is 10 stacks of it, your Manaflow Band will now restore 1% of your missing mana every 5 seconds, and this is up the rest of the game. You no longer have to interact with this functionality once you get the 250 mana and hit this spike right here. So what we'll be jumping into is my tier list for supports, and I'll be going over the builds that I do for it. So coming in at number 5 is going to actually be Morgana. Now Morgana was actually significantly stronger in last patch. The reason for this is because there was a lot more reasons to pick tank supports, and because of that, Morgana's strength was significantly amplified because he shut down 3 of the primary picks, which were Rakan, Tahm Kench, and Braum. Slightly on like Alistar also, but Alistar wasn't seeing as much play. Now she's kind of been bumped down to about a 5 on my radar. The reason for that is she is still extremely strong in lane. She has follow-up CC and hard CC that is really complementary to a lot of the AD carries that are currently played, such as Xayah, Caitlyn, Jhin are all ones that are immediately in my thought process, maybe even Varus too, now that people are playing a new build for Varus. For builds for Morgana, we're going to be tackling, actually we'll do the runes first. So pretty much in every time when I am playing Morgana, I've been predominantly running a page such as this, Sorcery primary with Airy, Manaflow, Celerity, and Scorch. Just a pretty standard build where you're going to be constantly pulling people to now play this Manaflow minigame, but also it was so that you could push the waves, harass the enemy players, and be able to shoot bindings around minions by having this push with your pool. This doesn't really change in any primary sense. Morgana is a little bit weaker since she doesn't get as much starting HP right now, but I've still been a really big fan of Bone Plating and Chrysalis in matchups or into team compositions that can dive you or kill you really easily, since I'm not a personal fan of building Zhonya's on the champion. I know a lot of people are. A secondary substitute for this now, though, is going to be as follows: to just run the boots and the biscuits. If you're against really, really hard pokes, such as maybe like Karma Caitlyn or something like that, you can substitute the magical footwear and switch it over to Time Warp Tonic, which is the old inspiration passive, which just gives you 20% extra healing on all your potions and biscuits. It's just a good complementary thing with the biscuits to then regen in lanes where you get poked a lot. Now, as for builds, for the most part, we're just usually going for a simple build, which is just Shurelia's. I can actually just pull this up. So usually my build will look something like this. I usually get a Shurelia's quite early into this game. The reason for that is, and you'll see this is a predominant thing, it's just really stat efficient. Kindle Gem is an extremely strong item for a support. It's very cheap, easy to build, 400 gold on each of the parts. Its completion is only 450 gold, and it gives you pretty much every stat that Morgana ever wants. Health, CDR, AP, even some movement speed, and it allows you to steroid your entire team into team fights or potentially kite out, which is really a nice thing as opposed to when we look at something like a Righteous Glory. After that, it's more of a personal preference. I've been really liking going secondary Twin Shadows. The reason for this is it complements your kit really well. You can use the Twin Shadows for scouting anytime that you're looking for people, and by using the Twin Shadows to slow people, allows you to aim your binds a little bit easier in that sense. Once again, it has like a lot of the stat lines that you want as a support on Morgana: AP, CDR, movement speed. Just allows you to stick on top of people and move around. I know a lot of people are a big fan of Zhonya's. I haven't been too crazy about it, but I think with the Locket nerf, it's going to be very hard. I'm going to be very hard pressed to build Locket ever on a lot of supports that are ranged, because I used to use that as my supplementary armor and MR. So maybe Zhonya's as a second or third item, depending on whether or not you're being focused a lot, or if you just care more about AP. This is totally a reasonable buy nowadays, as you can see from right here. And that's pretty much it for Morgana. I think she's pretty strong still, but she definitely, in terms of 8.6, I probably would put her like maybe third or second in terms of relative strength. But now she's kind of like closer to my end goal of top 5 right now. Still really strong if you're hitting lots of bindings, but she has clear weaknesses in the current matchups for a lot of champions. So going on to our next one, which is number 4, will be Zyra. Reason for Zyra getting kind of bumped in this situation is because there's not a lot of tanks anymore, so it's going to be a lot of mage versus mage matchups. And Zyra thrives in these kinds of situations as she is incredibly squishy and immobile, but can trade back really well with her plants and how long the range there are. Plus, she complements a lot of the AD carries that are currently being played. Think of Jhin, Varus, even some Ashe has been played into Caitlyn. She complements all of these champions extremely well because they use an ultimate to CC, and then she can root on top of it, and when she hits level 6, it's usually a guaranteed kill in this sense. Also, she synergizes well with Manaflow Band, which will be a pretty much primary thing for pushing the supports into the relative strength they have. How well they utilize Manaflow Band. And this is why a champion like Soraka isn't doing so well, in my opinion, because she never really had mana problems. Sure, primary resource is actually her health pool and the fact that she's relatively short range. So with the Manaflow Band change, it really didn't help her in any way because it's not regenerating health. So for runes for Zyra, keep it pretty static for the most part. The primary change pretty much that we're looking at differential from maybe when we were playing Morgana is that we switched to Comet. Comet's really easy for me to proc. I know a lot of people ask me, Lohpally, why don't you go Electrocute on this champion? The problem that I was having with it is Electrocute isn't terrible, but the primary problem that I'm running into is if I go into the Domination tree, I have to make a choice, right? Like, Resolve tree is exceptionally good at making sure that you don't die in all ends, so this was extremely powerful to have as a secondary, and if you didn't have Resolve secondary, if you had Resolve secondary, then you wouldn't have Sorcery secondary, which you need. I felt like you needed both of them in that situation, and now going more forward, you actually either need Inspiration or Resolve in most cases. So it's not that Electrocute is technically a bad keystone, it's that it builds into a path that is just unusable in its current state. And that's why I do not take Electrocute, just to touch on that. Comet is really good too because it procs off your plants. You're usually going to build Rylai's and Leandries. That's pretty much the core on the champion build all the time. So your Comet has really high accuracy rating later in the stages, and it also scales really well with AP. As you can see, it gets a 0.2 AP ratio, which is extremely good for a Keystone. Also, your plants also micro reduce the cooldown of Comet, so if you have a lot of plants going off, it can cycle through the Comet procs a lot more frequently. Now, there were 2 pages that we can use in this situation. Once again, you'll see is like a common thing. If you have a really rough matchup in terms of really heavy trading, or you're worried about getting killed or all in, this can also be relative to the jungler. Maybe your matchup is a little bit more poke heavy, but maybe there's a Kha'Zix or a Zed or something like that that's on the enemy team, and so you want the extra health and durability from Bone Plating and Chrysalis. In situations where you're against a poke lane, but maybe an all-in jungler or mid laner, what you can do as a substitute is you can just switch over to Second Wind to kind of help you supplement some of the poke that's happening to you in the early stages, while still having the Bone Plate and the extra health from the Resolve tree to keep you alive in the later stages of team fights. Now, if it's all poke, no fun, no games, pretty much the next thing is just to run the Biscuits and the Tonic. Also, another thing to note is because Mana Flow now gives you max mana and then regens you based on how much missing mana you have, Biscuits are actually extremely, extremely valuable because Biscuits over all 4 of these will give you 160 extra mana coupled with the 250 from Manaflow Band, which means that you'll have about over 400 extra mana just from these 2 spots alone, and it synergizes extremely well once you finish the Manaflow Band, because then the more missing, the missing mana you have will regen, and if your pool is bigger, then you have more mana to go through while you're regenerating, and it will make it so that your mana regen is higher. So this is like a standard, okay, they have a lot of poke in my lane, I need to regen as much as possible. If you think you can get away with it for scaling purposes and you don't need to be as tanky in the lane, then this is also a nice substitute, which you'll see being taken quite frequently, which is just magical footwear for the free boots and movement speed, and then we still take Biscuits. Even if you don't use the Biscuits, this Keystone is really just too synergistic with Manaflow Band right now. It basically gives you close to infinite mana on almost every champion. So once you finish the Manaflow Band talent, then it's just absolutely ridiculous in that sense. Going over to items for quick tackle. Most people usually ask me what my build looks like. Sorcerer Shoes is actually pretty much the most important thing to be getting in the early stages, as it gives you just Spell Pen in general, and Spell Pen is extremely valuable on a champion like that. Outside of finishing Sorcerer Shoes, you have 2 path options. You can either go the Haunting Guise, and then maybe finish out your Leandries and go into Rylai's, or you can go Oblivion Orb, which will give you more pen. Pretty much the only time I go Oblivion Orb is if I feel like I'm winning the game, or if I'm at an advantageous situation. I'm generating a lot of gold, maybe I got a turret early, maybe I'm actually one of the only magic damage dealers, so they're less likely to build Magic Pen, because Flat Pen is more valuable the less actual magic resist they have. So this is more commonly something I will do if I'm really far ahead. Outside of that, though, you usually just get Leandries, and then you just go from there, you just go Rylai's in most cases. This is just too synergistic, lets your plants hit way more often, and makes the burn for Leandries twice as good. Alright, so next in the situation is the next champion, number 3, which is Nami. Nami's bumped up a lot. The reason for that is that she just has no bad matchups anymore. Most of the champions that used to all-in her and kill her in the early stages and fuck her up, they just aren't there anymore. Alistar was definitely a pretty huge one. Braum actually was quite strong against her too. Tahm Kench had like neutral matchups into her. But yeah, her matchups are just really not a problem for the most part. And so she's just bumped up a huge bit. Plus the fact that Manaflow Band covers pretty much all of her mana problems now, which was a big complaint I had about the champion and why I build tier so frequently on her. I still have tried building tier. I like it, but it's not as necessary as before. I felt like beforehand you definitely needed to build tier on Nami in order to basically be able to sustain people if you weren't laning. So yeah. For Nami, it's a pretty generic kind of situation for the runes once again. The one thing that you can change about Nami, though, is whether or not you go Scorch or Gathering Storm. If the matchup is too long ranged, I just played a matchup where I was against a Jhin and a Karma. I just couldn't get in there at all. So in that situation, I would definitely go a Coin and Gathering the Storm, because I ain't touching that at all. I'm not gonna be able to get in range to like consistently get trades off. So take your trades where you can, but not like overforce it in that sense. And that's pretty much it. You can mess around with bone plating. I really like bone plating on her and Chrysalis on her a lot more than I like other ones. Other ones because sorry about that. Other ones because she likes to trade a lot, like really hard at level 1. She's a very momentum-based champion. She doesn't push the wave. She trades a lot and makes people lose HP, and then has their sustain advantage build up over time. And because of that, I really like Chrysalis and bone plating to just give you the extra HP to play with, and 2v1 in terms of trading. But if you feel like you aren't going to trade a lot, or you aren't very comfortable with that playstyle, then the substitute, once again, is just go Biscuits and Magical Footwear. Use the Biscuits for any HP that you're missing. It helps you recover mana in early stages. That is one thing, too, to note about Manaflow Band in general, is that you will be out of mana very fast in the first couple of levels while you're trying to ramp up your Manaflow Band. So that's also why I think Biscuits is really good, because it covers your mana in the early stages. For items for Nami, you can basically just go to a couple of different ways. If you have an Ardent user, getting Ardent's still quite good on her. You can just go with Aerie. You can just Tidecaller's Blessing, which is the E, which is considered a helpful spell, which then procs the shield, which then procs the Ardent. So it's really easy to proc Ardent without having to like use your heal on people. The numbers are really good too. She gets good AP ratios in that sense. If you decide that you do not have a good Ardent user, one thing I've been really liking is just going to Theans. Her bouncing of heals and her wave over across like a huge team fight, it's really easy for you to stack up charges for the champion and then just expend them with your heals. That way you can keep people topped off really easily. Outside of that, you'll eventually probably want a redemption in there, and your core will look like probably those three items no matter what. If you feel like your teammates need any mobility, Shurelia's is still actually a good item to buy, but I wouldn't recommend it first on her just because I really like having regen. Like, she's a very mana hungry champion, so especially if you're not going to go tier, at least make sure you get an Ardent or a Theans before you're looking at something like a Shurelia's. Alright, so coming in at number 2 will be our next champion. Oh, sorry. Which is actually a champion that's came out of nowhere. Karma. Karma utilizes this Manaflow Band so ridiculously well. She's the longest range support champion with Mantra Q of like the standard supports outside of, like not talking about like Xerath and all this other shit. So she's really good in that sense. She bullies lanes very well, and since people aren't playing as many tanks, and snowballing lane seems to have a higher premium right now, taking turrets, rotating around the map, getting kills, and just having like more map control in general, she guarantees that you win pretty much every range versus range matchup for the most part. She just does an insane amount of damage. She has a snare to set up kills. If she's hitting a Mantra Q into snare, she has ways to set up ganks. So she just in general has gotten a lot more power, especially with the Manaflow Band changes, and the fact that a lot of like tanky champions have kind of gone away, and on top of the fact that a lot of AD carries right now are poke based. So we see a lot of long range champions, Jhin, Caitlyn, Ashe, Varus. All these champions lend themselves really well to Karma. Plus a lot of people have now started picking up Kai'Sa, and she does really well into Kai'Sa. Because Kai'Sa's short ranged, and you can just bully her. You can bully Kai'Sa really, really heavily in a lot of situations. So for runes for her, I've been mostly just running substandard situations in this regard. If you can hit them with spells, I take Scorch and Spell Thieves. And then actually the difference is for Karma for the most part, I've been predominantly taking Inspiration, not really running Resolve. And the reason for that is I want to crush lane as hard as possible. So I want access to as much ability power at level 1 as possible. So I usually take like a really heavy like crush lane kind of situation. So the only thing I would really mess around with in this rune page is maybe potentially changing boots to Time Warp Tonic if I was against like a sustained heavy lane or maybe like Janna. Outside of that though, usually standard build for that. And then for runes, or for items, I've been just core running Athenes. Just maxing Q, getting Athene stacks. It's really easy for you when you're mantra queuing and cycling through spells to do a lot of damage early. Her base numbers are really good. You're not running into a lot of scaling issues since games are over relatively quickly right now. So yeah, I just like the Athene's core spike. I don't like Ardent as much. The reason for that is Ardent usually needs a lot of levels to spike up. Athene's gives you immediate damage, immediate power, and will give you a lot more AP over the long run with your items. After I get the Athenes, though, usually I'm asking myself the question between Ardent or Redemption. Just depends on your team composition, how many Ardent users you have, versus how badly you need to keep people alive. Maybe if they have a lot of assassins, then Redemption's going to do you a lot more favors than than Ardent. That's usually the only conscious choice you're going to make, and you're going to have both of those items, all three of those items by the end if the game goes too long. Alright, and without further ado, the last champion that on the tier list at number 1 is, unfortunately, not a favorite of mine, is Janna. The reason for that is there's been substantially a lot of buffs to assassin-based champions. Kha'Zix, Zed has started coming back into the meta. Just a lot of Rengar got some buffs too. So there's like a lot of junglers and champions that are very dive heavy, and Janna just handles it the best. She's the most reliable at pushing people away. She's always been a ridiculous stat steroid. Giving AD to any champion means that she has infinite value no matter what champion she's laning with. And in general, she isn't playing against champions that are too lane bullyish, since she can, you can put multiple points in the W early on in your lane and be able to just pressure them. And she does well with the Manaflow Band also, because that'll give her infinite mana for shielding in later stages. For runes right now, as you can kind of see from the layout, basically what I was talking about with Nami, where I decide on whether Spell Thieves or Coin based on, what the champions are I'm playing against. If they're both too long range, we'll just use the example of Jhin and Karma together, then I'm probably not going to get too many W's off, and I don't want to be forcing myself to generate gold and risk my HP. So then I would usually take Gathering the Storm and Scorch. If they're a little bit shorter range, Kai'Sa's probably going to get played a lot right now, then I'm more likely to take a Scorch or Scorch and Spell Thieves. For Janna, I would just recommend taking Boots and Biscuit Delivery. If you feel like you don't need the mana regen, I haven't tested her numbers as much right now, and you don't think you're going to get poked, you can switch to Cosmic Insight for a little bit shorter cooldown, but I haven't been too crazy about this summoner, or this rune for a while, since it doesn't usually change some kind of dynamic where, I remember Lulu help picks, if you use it on an enemy and then Glitter Lanced immediately, if you had like 45% CDR, like you could potentially get a second Q off. So those kinds of dynamics matter to me, but for Janna, it's just like, alright, well 5% CDR is a little bit more valuable to you as the game goes on. But I'm more likely, I'd be in more cases than not just inclined to take the Biscuit Delivery, especially since I mentioned that you have mana problems in the early stages with the new Manaflow Band, but once you break the mini game basically of getting 10 stacks on it, you just never have mana problems on pretty much any of the champions. Anyway guys, that's pretty much it for the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment in the section below, and click on that bell. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.